If we want to establish a more repeatable, reliable route to production, we need to automate all regression testing. My preferred strategy is low-level TDD guided by user-focused executable specifications, also sometimes called BDD scenarios. But how do you decide whether to test something in a BDD specification or in a more low-level unit test? Let's explore that in a bit more detail. Hi, I'm Dave Farley of Continuous Delivery. Welcome to my channel. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe and hit like if you enjoy the video, and also don't forget to hit the bell notification icon so that we can keep you informed of new episodes as they're released. My friend Goico has been publishing a series of challenges online called Given When Then with Style. So this episode is my response to Goico's Given When Then with Style challenge number 15, if you want to take a look. I'm sure that you may know Goico. He's well known in the industry. He's a very talented guy on a number of fronts and a serial author of some fantastic books. One of which is Specification by Example, hence the link with BDD and Given When Then kind of thinking. Goico's challenges take the form of a question which he poses, often with a specific code example as part of the solution, demonstrating some aspect of BDD thinking and specification by example. So here's the question. I see the benefit of using Gherkin for user-facing end-to-end tests, but a lot of the examples here seem to be testing components or smaller units of code, not just the interface. This can lead to duplication between different types of tests. If something can be covered equally well with a unit test or a Given When Then test, it's not easy to decide where to put it. How do you choose if something should be a unit test or a BDD specification? Here are some of the responses that people have posted so far for you to have a read through while I'm talking. But what do I think? Well, my first bit of advice is don't worry about it. I think that there's a bigger danger in trying to over-optimize to minimize the amount of tests that you write rather than writing too many. I think that this question kind of comes from the wrong perspective. I guess that what I'm really saying is that I think that this is kind of the wrong question to ask. This question starts from seeing tests as a cost, a burden that is imposed upon us in order to achieve our ends of writing some code. And I think that's the wrong way round. I think a better perspective is to see tests as tools that allow us to achieve a better outcome. We're going to use those tools to create something, in this case good software. If we were carpenters, we wouldn't worry about how many tools we used to achieve some end. We're interested in the goal that we're trying to achieve. Imagine, for example, that we're going to build something. Maybe we're going to build a fence or something like that. On the one hand, we want to accurately measure the center line of the post so that when we nail the cross pieces onto the post, it's going to be neat and tidy and it looks good, so that the nails are in the right place. On the other hand, we want to less accurately perhaps, but measure the distance between the posts so that they're at a regular distance, apart. We're going to use something to measure each of these things. One is probably a ruler that can measure to millimeters or 1/16 of an inch, something like that. And another is probably a tape measure that's only accurate to a centimetre or half an inch. We could use either one for either job, but neither would do the job of the other as well. It would be better if we picked the best tool for each job. When we measure with the tape measure, we'll measure with less precision, but we can quickly and easily measure over longer distances. When we measure with the ruler, we can measure much more accurately, but it's a pain to measure over longer distances. When we measure the distance between the posts with the tape, we're also measuring the width of the fence posts, or allowing for it. There's a side effect of measuring the spaces between the posts. So we're repeating the measurement that we already did with our more accurate ruler. This isn't waste, we're trying to answer different questions. So we're picking the best tool to answer each question. We could use the tape measure to position the nails, but it would be rubbish at doing it. And we could use the ruler to measure the distance between the posts, but it would be a real pain. My advice is to focus on the task at hand. From your requirements describing what the user would like of your system, come up with one or more specific examples that would demonstrate that the requirement was met. Create a specification for each of these scenarios, an executable specification that captures those scenarios, ideally written in the language of the problem domain so it focuses on what the system needs to do rather than how it does that. These are your acceptance tests, or your BDD scenarios. Now you've got a failing BDD scenario as a starting point, a specification to work to, do test-driven development for everything else. Test every line of code that you write. Focus on evaluating, making sure that the code that you write is the code that you meant to write. Ignore whether you're repeating yourself in your specification. Focus on just testing that thing. This is your more accurate ruler. This is the more fine-grained, precise measuring stick. Keep doing that until your executable specification is met and the BDD scenario passes. With this approach, there will inevitably be repetition. But this is the same as the tape measure and the ruler. It's repetition in completely different contexts. There's another potential for repetition in this strategy that's worth thinking about. Repetition that, again, I think you shouldn't care too much about though. What about the overlap between different BDD scenarios? I think it's important to think carefully about what it is that we're trying to optimize for here. Is our goal to minimize the amount of typing that we do? Is it to reduce the number of CPU cycles when we're executing our tests? Or is it to reduce the thinking? Is it to make it easier for us to understand what's going on? I think that by far the latter outweighs the value of the other two. Clearly, we can be stupid and assume that CPU cycles are free and infinite, and that the amount of time that we spend writing these things doesn't matter. So we want to be efficient at those things, but those are really, really secondary considerations. That's rarely where the real cost of development lies. One of the biggest costs of development is in coupling. And this is at the technical level as well as at the organisational level. If you and I have to coordinate our separate pieces of work, we will inevitably go slower because there will be an overhead to the coordination costs. If separate teams have to do the same thing, that's even worse. So we could try and organise our work and our teams so that we are more independent of one another. We can proceed without coordinating our work with other groups. We can do this architecturally by kind of designing seams in our code, more modular systems, and organisationally by having teams that are focused on particular areas of the business function of the system and so on. If we decided, though, instead to try and perfectly optimise our tests so that each behaviour is tested once and only once across the whole organisation, that means that we're forced, like it or not, to coordinate across the organisation, to figure out a perfect path for the evaluation of our system. And if we are testing all the time, which is what I would recommend, then we bear that cost, that coordination cost, all the time too. So, instead, relax. Don't worry about it quite so much. Worry less about minimising test cases and more about testing the feature in front of you. Thank you very much for watching.